Welcome to Auburn Community Television in this episode of Meet the Artist. Meet the Artist is supported by the North Auburn Artists to introduce artists in our local community. Today our guest local artist is Barbra Paitich. Barbra is a member of the North Auburn Artists, and she has invited us to join her at her studio. And I am so excited to see her studio because she does jewelry work, silk work, metal work, and then she combines the silk and metal to make the most one-of-the-kind sculptures. There's so much to see, so let's get started. Hi, Barbra.
Hi, Lucinda.
Thank you so much for having Auburn Community Television to come to your studio today. This is absolutely fabulous to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, it is so amazing because you have such diversity in what you do, although there's a lot of commonality to the things you do. And so I'm real excited to go through kind of your passage through your journey in art, but also to just the evolution of your artwork itself, which I think is definitely demonstrated by what we have here in your studio.
Okay.
So what I love about the wall behind us is it really does show all of the different things that you have done over time and currently still do.
Right, yeah.
So why don't we start with, because one of the things that you do is a jewelry line.
Yes.
So let's just talk a little bit about it. We may not be able to spend a lot of time on it today, so I thought, well, let's at least get it in at this point.
Okay. Well, the jewelry line evolved. I started doing a little glass to make, dichroic glass, to make scarf pins, because people wanted that. And then when I was doing the metal for my wall hangings, I got to play with plasma cutter and pull in copper and brass, and it just seemed appropriate to make some jewelry. So that evolved from wanting to have something to hang the silk on, and that's how I learned the techniques for the cutting of the steel, mostly then. And now it's copper, steel, brass.
And you're wearing one of your pieces today.
And this is glass. Yes, this is dichroic glass. And I have a kiln that I melt several layers of glass to get the depth.
So that was kind of like an outgrowth of your other work. So let's back up a little bit and let's talk about the silk work.
Okay.
And that was kind of an evolution for you too, to get into your silk work.
It was. I was an art minor at San Jose State, always have been an artist and dabbled in lots of things and wanted to focus down a little bit, but when we first moved to Auburn, I wanted sheep and the wool came from that, and I ended up doing some weaving, which doesn't work for me. It was too repetitive, but it got me into fibers. I was using some silk when I was weaving, and so I decided, I'd done watercolors already, and decided to try silk, and fell in love with that. And that became my main medium where I really thrived, and I got better than I was with everything else. And then through the years, people would say, gee, that scarf looks great, but I'd like to hang it on my wall. And so I tried wooden rods and copper pipe, and then decided that wasn't me, and took a welding class at Sierra College and fell in love with the plasma cutter. So all this steel is cut in the way that I paint, in an organic, sort of free form
And this
style.
is then when you melded the metal with the silk.
With the silk.
Well, let's kind of look at this wall behind us because it does show just how versatile you are in using both of these different types of mediums and then bringing them together. Let's take for the two that are right directly behind us, are where you do have the silk work and then with metal work.
Right. So this one is a painting, and I framed it with the metal. And again, it's free form. These are grasses, sort of, to frame this piece.
Yes.
And then these, I wanted more sculptural. I went into more sculptural work.
Well, this definitely, I think, really captures the fluidity of the piece itself. And it's interesting because this actually isn't silk, is what you were telling me.
It is silk, but it's silk organza.
Organza, okay.
And so when I said it was organza and it was that stuff we wore as little girls,
yes.
This is a stiffer fabric. So I use a shibori technique, which is folded silk
Yes.
on a rod, and then it will retain that stiffness. And I tried other stiffeners and it didn't work, but the organza does.
Now, when we get to talking about the silk, you're going to tell us a little bit more about the shibori style versus the painting on the silk that you do.
Right.
So we can understand a little bit the differences between those two.
And I usually meld those two styles together. Too.
So
not on this one, but on some.
Some of them. And this is what the silk painting. And so this isn't actually like taking paints on it.
It's dyes.
It's dyes.
Yeah, so actually my wall hangings are washable, like my scarves, but we don't wash them. I have to steam the dyes to set them. And that's what sets the dyes. Otherwise, they'll keep moving a little. And I can show you on this other piece that we have over here how that happens.
So that's just one of the final steps in it, is to do the steaming process.
That's the last step.
I see. So when you were experimenting on how to show your silk work, behind you you have another way that you were trying to see if this would work.
Well, this was the earlier days, and I still have a few of these, but no longer do I frame in a frame under glass. It doesn't look distinct from a watercolor or maybe even acrylics. So I needed it to look and flow. I have, I want it to move.
You definitely, you can see just the difference between when it's displayed like this and then go forward to this. The other is just way on beyond your shoulder, is what looks like some just metal work. Now, does it have any silk in there as well?
This is silk.
Oh, it's silk. It looks...
This is all silk, and this is metal.
And that's the metal.
The same leaves in the
Yes.
in the metal to make the frame on that.
Oh, that's in...
And then I have another piece over there that has branches.
It's the same thing. Well, I'm excited for you to show us the metal work that goes along with how to actually display the silk work.
Okay.
So the first thing, though, because it is the starting point, we're going to go and take a look at the dyeing process for your silk.
Okay.
And then we're going to kind of progress through how you go about making these absolutely gorgeous scarves that you make, and then also on into the metal work.
Okay.
All right. So here we are in phase one. And this is where we're actually going to start working, or I should say, you're going to start working on the silk.
Right.
And going to be applying the dyes to it. But let's start out, because I think phase one is actually stretching the silk.
Yes. So you can't take a loose piece of silk and start painting on it. It'll just move around, and the dyes will run onto the table.
So it needs to be
stretched. Yes, and there's all kinds of ways to stretch it, but this is my chosen way.
Now I noticed that your frame, you actually are higher at that higher elevation than you are here. And why do you have it set up that way? Is it just easier to reach?
Do you know what? Actually, it's better for me physically.
Okay.
The best way is have it flatter. But that's neck issues, so it has to be a little bit raised for me. But it will sometimes run, and therefore I sometimes have to fix things or deal with that. But it's better for me physically, that's all.
So I imagine, though, that with your experience, and you know that that could occur, you maybe even use that as part of the process.
And that's a lot of this process. It's very serendipitous. There's always mistakes. This gold is resist, and it's meant to help prevent the dye, to help to keep the color where I want it. But every once in a while it leaks out because it's not a perfect line, and I do it in a very sketchily way anyway. So sometimes it leaks out, and I deal with that.
So when you say resist, what is a resist?
It's something that stops the flow of the dyes, so much like wax in a batik. Only I don't take it out. I want my resist. I use a gold and a black, and I want them to stay because it's part of the design.
So that's what we're seeing here on this right now, is your resist, where you've come in and you've done your sketch.
Right. So I set this up already, but it starts off just blank.
All right. Well, let's start this process. Oh, and I will back up, because you are starting on white. Do you always start on white?
Almost always.
Okay.
Every once in a while, I'll buy a light-colored scarf and play with it, but my colors are pretty bright and intense, and I tend to just start with white.
Okay, so let's see how this process works.
So what I use are dyes. They're made for silk. These are actually made in California. And when you paint it, you put the dyes and let them flow. Part of the whole process is allowing it to flow. And that green that was there already, I can go back and I just put water on my brush and I can move it around. And you can see I just went out of that line, but that won't be a problem later. But you can go back and move these dyes as you go along until they're steamed. And steam them at the end of the process. So I'll show you, these are actually going to be red flowers with a purple background. And it's a combination that I think is really fun. But this is how then I come in and bring the dyes. And these are two different colors of red. So you can see that this one is a darker red, but then I go back in, and this is how I shade and make the dyes move around and get it to look more like a flower.
And I can see where you're saying is how it does stop the flow.
So it's basically stopping the flow from going onto the background. If it leaks over, then I work with it.
Now, with this line that you have that goes through, it kind of zigzags through. It didn't look like you actually drew a line in there. Was that because the resistance created this, or
the resistance?
It just seemed to like appear.
No, it was there. It was just like
in the
this
resistance, but it basically though when you painted
it.
it.
Because I painted over it.
Yes.
So that's just a line that I want to show as a line, and that's that's why I do it. A lot of silk artists just do the outline, but I find it works better for me to do it in this form that's a little more sketchy.
Oh, well, I like it too because I need immediate satisfaction, and to me, I'm getting immediate satisfaction from this process.
That's right. And see how I've got these two colors here now, so I can go through and do that. Greens are real fun because they move around, and I'll show you on that other piece that's behind us. But greens will move a lot, and they mix well with colors. So I will end up putting, as I go along, and see, I'm not making just solid color.
Yes.
I do it like a watercolorist would do it too.
Now, in your pots here, is this just pure dye? Or
This is dye. These are diluted dyes. I use professional dyes that need to be steamed. There are lots of other silk dyes that you can buy and put a fixative on them. But these are the ones I like, and I can get the intense colors that I like to work with.
I love intense colors.
So see, I can put in, and you can see that I make it uneven.
Yes. You
can make, and lots of things have really smooth lines, but I'll go back and work this, as I'll show you over there, over and over until I get what I like.
Now, do you always start with your image first and then come back in and fill in the background?
That's a very common question when I demonstrate. No, I don't. But because the lines are not completely predictable, I tend to start this way. And then if there's a leak through, I can deal with it before I do the background.
Yes.
But honestly, when I do the background with the purple, I'm going to bring some red into it as a shadow anyway. So it's not a disaster. It's what makes this fun.
What I like about it too is, as you're saying, is that you can always come back in, add a little bit of extra water to it. And then you can incorporate the other color within it.
It makes it a little more flexible than watercolors, for instance, because I can do that. Now see, because this is going to be a poppy, I'm going to want, and I'll add color until I get a color I like. This is a little bit too green, but eventually it'll be blacker. My black tends to be a little
bit here. I felt like I'm like right on your work. This is so fascinating because I've never thought that this is how you go about making these scarves.
So this is a little bit of a different green, and once this is dry, I can go back and as I said, I'll show you on the other piece that we can go back and move things around. But it takes a while to dry. So that piece that's over there, where I let people paint when they're in the studio on a tour, and I'll have them move to somewhere else while it dries to show them how, see, I can go in with this water, and if I wanted that to stay white, but not quite with such a harsh line, I can go back and soften that.
And that's just by applying the water.
And that's just water. And water will move this until I steam it. And then once it's steamed, it's set.
Now, when you drew out this design, did you already have an idea in your head about the colors that you're going to be using?
Mm-hmm. I don't always, but usually I do.
Do you ever find that those kind of change as you're working with it?
A lot. I'll look at a color like this green isn't going to work the way I want it to, and I'll probably put a little brown and a little orange in it. In fact, I can show you how this is.
Now, if you wanted to on the green, can you go back in and actually lighten up sections as well?
No, not very well. It's a little like watercolor in that you can't go back in and lighten it. I can, if I wanted to, I could take a paper towel, add a little water, and dab out some, but not much.
Okay.
Mostly it just goes darker.
And so that's why you were saying is to bring in the more depth and stuff, you'll use a brown or something to do that on that leaf.
That's right. And a little bit of brown or a little bit of orange really makes the green pop.
Well, I do just love the way that the color and the depth in it just seems to pop out at you as you're working on it. And you know, one of the things I think I would have trouble with is if I was leaving this to the last and just working on the background, because I would want to do this.
Yeah, and
so you'd have to be pretty disciplined
to do the background first.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, and that's probably the artist's mind in you and in me, that it changes as it goes, and then the background has to be different.
Yes.
So that's what you're talking about, and that's true. That's true.
Very much so. Well, the next step in this process, once you've had all of background and done, actually you're going to show how you can do some alterations to that background.
Yes.
And are you at a point when we can maybe
Yes, because I can go back and work on this later.
Okay. So we're going to move on to phase 2. So now we're in the next phase, and this is where the dyes on the silk has actually dried. And she's already put the background in, and this is another piece. And you're going to show us how you can now manipulate the background.
Right.
After it's even been through a drying process. And actually, I think it's going to show more depth in the actual piece.
Yes, that's the reason to do it. So
the one let's start with is that you've been working on half of this, and last night you did some work on it, and so you can show that where you just squirted over it, and so that's where we end up with the difference in the color that we have here in the background.
Right.
And you have actually saved the other half
to show
how this works, so we can see this in action. So let's move on down.
Okay.
And take a look at how this process works.
Okay, so this is dry, as was that, and you can see especially in the background and in the leaves, I've put just color, and it's pretty flat. When I hit it with water, and this shows how, this is just water, but it shows how the dyes will move. And I can go back with a brush too, but see how this changes because of the different dyes. And I can add as little or as much as I want. I can go back. You can't go back too many times because it'll start muddying and it'll quit moving.
So it actually lightens up certain portions of it. And that's because the dye is moving?
Yes. So it's pushing dye out.
Well, we can actually see this work right in here where you've sprayed it, and it's actually forced all of the dye more towards the edges. And it's almost like a leaf pattern that we're seeing now behind, whereas before it was just solid.
It was just flat. Yeah, so any of this, so now sometimes I do a lot of this, sometimes I don't do it at all. But in this piece I did it specifically so I could demonstrate. And then if I chose to, if there's some line that I don't like, or for instance, a place where it's bleeding a little, I can go in with a paintbrush and move it even more, or add some more color. But that gives you a feel for this technique and how much the dyes are different from just a paint.
Definitely. I think there's a lot more maneuverability. Is that such a word?
That's true.
You can manipulate it so much more than I would have thought that you could do. And it's very fascinating. I love what water does. But here comes my concern.
Yeah.
So now you've shown me that really water could do a lot of damage to these pieces. So how do you stop this process?
Okay, so once I'm done, I have to steam these scarves, wall hangings, whatever I've done. And the way I do it is my husband actually built a big tall steamer for me, and I roll the silk on a carpet roll between layers of unprinted newsprint. And then I put it in my steamer. It steams for 3 hours, hot, steamy air. And I have to put paper on the top because you can't have any drips, because any drips would still move it.
That's what I was wondering.
And leave a white spot, and it really ruins a piece.
Oh, wow.
So,
so the newspaper actually then stops it from further movement, because the steam actually creates a condensation, doesn't it?
It does that. That's why I put the paper
top.
at the top, because it condenses. Okay. Between them, the reason there's so much paper, and I put 2 or 3 layers, depending on how dark my piece is, I put 2 or 3 layers of just unprinted newsprint, because they will bleed into each other during that process too.
Wow, this is
But once they're done, they're washable. Hand washable, not machine. Mainly not machine, because I don't want the resist to come off.
Yes. Well, that's amazing then. So you don't have to worry about if it gets wet again, because you have actually set these colors.
That's right. And they're washable, although, you know, rarely does a scarf actually get dirty unless we have it on when we're eating and spill some wine or something on it. And then you just wash it.
Now, we started this process with a white silk. And you also, though, don't necessarily start the dye process that you demonstrated here on white. You go through another process, and what was that? That's
a shibori dyeing technique, and it's a Japanese style of tie dyeing, for lack of a better word. And I use PVC pipes. People use all kinds of things. Some people use rusty pipes, because the rust effect is pretty cool on silk as well. And you scrunch it down, and then we can show you some pieces. We can move to some pieces that we can show you. And so I do the shibori first, and then I put in a design that I feel fits with the shibori. Well, and it makes it a totally different look.
Let's see if we can, because we do have one behind us that we can just move forward. Should we just move this one?
Yeah, this one is not as typical technique, but this one, and it was done on a pipe like this. And I scrunch it down, and then the way I do it, I use my same dyes and either paint them on with a brush or squirt them in a squirt bottle, and then use this as a background. So there's a lot of scarves in the studio that have this as a background, and then I add more background or whatever.
Well, let's go back through this process. So this is your regular white silk that we had seen.
And this is a big piece. This is a big piece that's folded several times, rolled on this, and then this is a sinew that I wrap around it so that it's tight. And some of the other pieces that we could look at show it a little bit more definitely what the style looks like. But then I take it, put it on the stretcher, and then make it design whatever fits.
Well, I love the colors that you've created in this one. And then you'll go in now and you will paint something on top of this using the other dye.
Yes, and I'll do a drawing. I'll do a resist drawing on it.
So what do you have? Do you have any idea what you're going to do with this one yet?
I don't.
Wow.
It sort of speaks to me as I go, and I work around it because these dyes are already on here.
Well, that's just part of the creative process. Well, the next thing we're going to go to is actually showing how she has taken these silk products, and is now going to display them. And this is going to be through her metal work. And she's actually going to demonstrate how she does her metal work. And so let's just hope we don't set ourselves on fire. She's come dressed for it today. And you're going to show us that technique.
Yeah.
So here we are at the phase where we're going to show how to actually mount some of the silk work so that you can have wall hangings and sculptures in your home. And this was a process because you wanted to figure out a way to display your silk work. So you've got a bigger piece here, and I have a smaller one. And this is what you ultimately then will weave the silk in, that you can actually have a draping effect.
Exactly. So I can drape the silk and make a sculptural piece. This one's pretty flat. This one's more, it's more three-dimensional.
Now this process that you went through, you went to a class, I understand, to learn how to do the welding?
Right. At Sierra College, they have a great class. My neighbor artists, Jennifer Johnson and the Nicholsons, also took classes from them. And I fell in love with the plasma cutter because it works the way I work, freeform.
So so you're going to demonstrate that. So these are the finished products, is what we're striving for. But so you have some pieces that you've already cut out.
Right. So here's what they look like. If you can you get this? These are just the pieces that I have cut and ground, got the burrs and things off, and then I can spot weld these with my spot welder in any shape or form that I choose to do. But this is what they look like to start before I put the patina on them.
So patina, what is the patina?
Well, so in both of these cases, it's mostly rusted, but I have a couple of techniques that I do to make the rusting happen the way I want. Sometimes I can darken it with a torch. Sometimes I add vinegar or other combinations of things too.
And so you can have a variation just in the same piece then too.
Mm-hmm. And generally, you know, again, so much of what I do is serendipitous. It happens as it happens. And the rusting you can't control very well.
So now what are you going to demonstrate for us? Is it actually welding these pieces together or,
no,
or cutting pieces?
I could do that, but that's just putting it between the two rungs of the spot welder. What I'm going to do is just show you, and this adds a little drama to the tape because I'll cut this and you'll see the sparks fly, and that's why I'm dressed like this. It's all natural fiber. I don't want anything polyester that'll melt in case a spark hits you, and I'll be covered up and I won't. And I have goggles. This process, the plasma cutter really isn't too hard on the eyes, but because I do it a lot, I wear some darkening goggles. But it's not going to hurt these guys to look at it for a minute. And I'll just suit up and show you for a couple seconds how this works.
And the safety equipment is a significant component of this process.
Because everything gets hot, I have to wear heavy gloves. And I protect my eyes because I do it often enough that I think it's important to do.
What I'm going to do is step out of the frame.
So you don't catch on fire.
Yes, I really don't want to be the one that's running down and with somebody coming after me with water. So I will leave you to putting on your equipment.
Okay.
And you'll look like you're going into space.
Yeah. So this
All right.
I have a little plasma cutter back here. This is the electricity to the metal, and then I will try to get in the line of the camera here. And then, because I didn't start at the beginning, but that shows you, this shows you how I've cut that steel. Now what I have to do on this one is go back a little. I didn't start at the end, and that shows you how it comes apart.
Now on this, you didn't have anything that was drawn out there, so we Or did you have a lot?
I didn't.
Don't touch it.
It's hot. I didn't, but I do. Now you can see I have some little hearts.
Oh, so you can use those as your pattern.
Well, no, I actually just draw it.
Oh, okay.
And I do have a grease pencil that I can draw on here, so I can still see that when I'm cutting.
Well, this is an amazing process, and I could actually see how you could kind of get into this.
Yeah, so it's fun, right? And I just kind of do, now when I do, should I take my glasses off?
Well, sure, let's get them off.
When I do, for instance, I do a lot of grapevines. And when I do the leaves, I've just got those down. So when I do it like this and make the leaves with the stem. And then I use skinnier pieces to make the vine.
Well, that's absolutely amazing, and it's quite a setup here, and what a wonderful setting to be able to do it in.
Yeah.
This is very lucky for you.
It is.
So I can see why you create something so beautiful.
Thank you.
So I think that this really brings us to the close on how to do this silk work and the metal work, and to combine them to make these incredible sculptures. There's so much to see at this particular studio. She does so many different things, and I want to thank you so very much for having us.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Now, if somebody wants to come by your studio, how do they get in contact with you?
Best way to get me is paitichb@gmail.com or barbrapaitich.com. And the Barbara has only, leave out the middle A.
Okay, so it's B-A-R.
B-R-A.
Okay. And I want to thank you for tuning in to Auburn Community Television in this episode of Meet the Artist. We have regular visits at various studios throughout the community, and we hope that you will be tuning in to see who our next artist is going to be.